When I started thinking about filmmaking in Canada, there really wasn't much feature film uh, production. Most of it seemed to be CBC, and even when it was long, I mean, it was television. And the rest was National Film Board, and there wasn't really a lot of independent filmmaking around at all. The result was that when I finally did come up with the idea to make my first feature film, which was Shivers, I felt really quite like somebody on Mars in Canada trying to make this film, because it wasn't even recognized by a lot of people as a horror film, because at that time most horror films involved castles and capes and Dracula and the distance of some centuries. And here was a modern film that took place in a high-rise apartment building. It was ultimately at Cinepix with John Dunning and Andre Link that I found people who understood the film, understood what it could be, and were very excited by it. And that was, for me, a minor miracle at the time, because it was like a desert for me everywhere else. The Cinepix was sort of the Roger Corman New World Pictures of Canada, and I knew that that was the place to start, just as Roger Corman gave a start to Scorsese and Coppola and Jack Nicholson, endless numbers of filmmakers. Unfortunately, at the time, I don't think there had been any horror films made in Canada. It was an unknown genre in Canada. I had presented Cinepix with the script for The Parasite Murders, which was Shivers, and it didn't take them long to decide that they wanted to do it. But I said, but I've got to direct it. And this, of course, was a problem for them, because I had only directed my underground films. And it took 3 years for them to decide, along with what is now Telefilm and was then the CFDC, the Canadian Film Development Corporation, that in fact they would give the green light to my directing Shivers. But in the meantime, there were many attempts to buy the script from me and involve me in many ways other than the only way I wanted, which was to direct the film. And in fact, at one point, in despair of Shivers ever happening, I went with my friend Norman Snyder, who was a writer, who later ended up co-writing Dead Ringers with me. We went to LA. It was our first LA trip. And at Barbara Steele's, I met Jonathan Demme, who had just directed her in Women in Chains. And he was, of course, a low-budget genre picture director at the time, and being really the early 70s, he had a long beard and long hair. When I later met him as the director of Silence of the Lambs and other very classy movies, I didn't recognize him because he didn't have the beard and the hair, you know. I had to re-meet him. But on the beach, I remember, with Barbara Steele, I was talking about my problems with trying to see if maybe Roger Corman would do Shivers, if there was some other way. Would I have to move to LA the way so many people did, and the way Ivan Reitman eventually did? And Demme said, "Oh yeah, I've read that script, The Parasite Murders." I said, "You've read the script? How could you possibly read? Why would you read this obscure script?" He said, "Oh, well, because Cinepix asked me to direct it." And I said, "What?" It turned out it was Alfred Pariser in particular. And I said, "You know, there's no way you can direct that script, because I'm directing that script. And that's my deal with Cinepix." And he said, "You know, I had a feeling there was something they weren't telling me." The script for Shivers, which was then called The Parasite Murders, really pressed the button for John and Andre, because they had been looking for a way to get into the American market. Their films did very well being distributed in Canada and Europe. And they had, in a strange way, a very European sensibility, even the sex comedies. But they hadn't really cracked the U.S. market. And they, looking at Corman, I suppose, as well, thought a low-budget horror film would be the way to get their foot in the door of U.S. Distribution. Not as distributors, but to get their film distributed in the States. And so they were very excited about my script, which I believe they recognized to be quite unique and strong, and definitely doable for a low budget. Unfortunately, I had only done these two strange movies, Stereo and Crimes of the Future, and that made them very nervous, and rightly so, because they knew better than I did how little I knew about professional filmmaking. And in fact, when you see Shivers or you see Rabid, you are seeing me going to the John and Andre School of Filmmaking. I mean, that is really, you're watching me learn how to make movies as you see these films. I had to learn fast because Shivers had a 15-day shooting schedule plus 2 pickup days. But I really, when I sat down to my first production meeting on Shivers, I didn't know what anybody did. I didn't know what a production manager did. I didn't know what a props person did. I didn't know what an assistant director did. I didn't know what any of the people who were sitting around the table waiting for me to tell them what to do. I actually didn't know what they did. And it was, I was at the head of this table and definitely faking it. Fortunately for me, John and Andre were wonderful mentors, and they understood exactly where I was, and they surrounded me with people who knew a lot more than I did. And that included Ivan Reitman, who had produced and directed a couple of films before I did, and he was acting as the line producer on these films. So that was, as I say, it's the sort of the Cinepix School of Filmmaking is what Shivers and Rabid represent. I had never really cast a film before, and it is a strange art and a difficult one, often a very nerve-wracking one. And once again, it was John and Andre and Ivan as well who kind of hand-held me through the process. One of the things that we did was to hold an open casting call, literally open. I mean, anybody could walk in off the street to audition, and I had to sit there and try to make them work for some part. It was really being thrown into the deep end, but it was wonderful training. I mean, wonderful training for dealing with the strange sensibility that comes with actors and more importantly comes with would-be actors. In a way, most of these people were more like would-be extras than actors, but I had to really, you know, we had enough money for a few actors at the beginning, at the top. But after that, it was really find whoever you can find. A lot of the actors, I had to kind of find ways to get them to act because they were amateurs, really. The people who walked in off the street but who got a role, I had to kind of tell them how to make themselves look sad or happy and how to walk and how to stand and that sort of thing. And I barely knew how to do that myself. I barely knew what to tell them. It was very strange. The acting part of it was especially difficult with Shivers because I had no time to deal with the actors. I mean, it was kind of, okay, we do the 10 pages of dialogue before 10 o'clock, and then we go and we crash the cars in the underground garage. Then we do the special effects bug coming out of the stomach scene, and then we shoot the security guard, and then we, you know, and it was on and on. That's the rest of the afternoon. So I literally really had, and it was understood that I would have very little time with the actors, very little time dealing with the dialogue, and most of the time had to go to the effects. I think in each case, each actor had an important personal reason for being in the film. Sue Petrie had been in many, many Canadian comedies, and she was a lovely actress and very funny and very beautiful. She looked a lot like Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, in those days. And her personal reason for doing the movie was that it was a very emotional role in which she cries almost all the way through the movie. In fact, the first time you see her, she's almost just about in tears. And everything's going wrong when we first meet her with her husband. He's sick. There's something strange with him. And she wanted to prove that she could do a very emotional scene because in her comedies she'd always been the cool bitch. You know, she'd never been able to emote. Unfortunately, she had not learned to do this on her own. So I would have to, she said, slap her really hard on both sides of the face before each take. Now, there are a lot of takes in a movie. That's a lot of slapping. I had never slapped a person on the face in my life. And in addition, she would grate onions and then rub the onions in her eyes as well. This was pretty difficult for me to do because I remember the first time we did it was a scene when she runs from the bedroom into the bathroom. She's going to put in her contact lenses. She's sobbing because her husband has gotten incredibly grotesquely weird. She doesn't know why, and I'm not going to say right now why. But so I had the crew roll a camera, and for us this was a big thing because I didn't like to waste film. We didn't have very much film to shoot. Soon I went into the bedroom. I slapped her across the face once or twice. She said harder. I slapped her a little harder. She said really harder. So I really slapped her because the film was running out. She shrieked and screamed. We opened the door. She's going to run out, and the crew's standing there looking. They can't believe that I have been beating up this actress who screamed. I said, look, just action. Sue runs, does the scene. It's actually pretty good, but not perfect. Because I can't remember if it's a focus problem. We have to do it again. Take two. I'm going to have to slap her again. Well, eventually we got very, very used to this. I have to say that my hands started to get bruised, and so did her cheeks. I tried to convince her to, think of something sad, Stanislavski, anything. But nothing worked. It had to be that. And finally we got pretty blasé about it. I did, Sue did, the crew did. Then Barbara Steele came on to the shoot, and she was only there for a few days. And the first scene that she had was one where Sue, of course, runs crying to Barbara. And so naturally we said, okay, Barbara, we're going to roll first. We rolled, closed the door, slap, 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 scream, shriek, door opens, Sue runs in to do the scene. Barbara can't believe that she just heard slapping, and the director has slapped the actress around. Being a pro, she does the scene. After cut, Barbara, who's over 6 feet in her high heels, grabs me by the collar and lifts me up off the ground. She says, I can't believe you hit that actress. She said, I've worked with Fellini, I've worked with Louis Malle, I've worked with all of the greats. I've never seen such a despicable display of autocratic. I said, please, don't hit me, Barbara, don't hit me. It's Sue. She wants me to. She said she wants me to. She begged me to. I don't want to do it. She asked me to. She said, really? I said, yeah. She said, how hard are you hitting her? So I said, well, hold up your arm and I'll show you. I slapped her arm as hard as I'm hitting. She said, you hit her that hard? I say, yeah. And then Barbara says, do I have a scene where I cry? And I said, Barbara, no, you don't. The effects in Shivers were really quite groundbreaking in their own small way. As inexpensive as they were, they matched, bizarrely enough, some of the effects that were being done in the film The Exorcist at the time. The use of bladders, which is to say really balloons or condoms being filled and deflated to give a pulsing effect under skin, was something that was being done for a couple of scenes in The Exorcist, but we didn't know about this, of course, because it was about the same time. And we found a real gem of a special effects man, Joe Blasco, who still runs a special effects school that I think is quite highly thought of. And Joe was an amazing guy, and he had all these wonderful ideas, like the bladder effect to suggest movement, inflating a series of bladders to suggest movement under skin and under surfaces. It was a fantastic training ground once again, because you had to think incredibly quickly, think on your feet, and under incredible pressure of time and everything else. And there were moments, for example, when Joe Silver was almost gassed to death in the hall because the stuff, I forget what it is, that was used at the time to use the fumes that were coming, the smoke that would curl off the parasites as they were burning through you. And there's a scene where he has the parasites all over his face, and when this stuff was being squirted on his face to make smoke, in the confusion and the haste, and of course everybody was dead tired, the cap popped off the bottle. It hadn't been screwed on tightly enough, and this stuff just splurged all over his face, and he was vomiting in the halls. They said, Ivan, The actor is vomiting in the hall. He's on his knees. No, it's not part of the scene. It's not something I've thought of. I think he might have to go to the hospital. I'm not sure. Does he really have to go to the hospital? I mean, can't you just wait and see? You know, it was that sort of thing. And it's certainly true that is when accidents happen, is when everybody's tired and you're under incredible pressure. But Joe Silver, being the trooper that he was, vomited, got it over with, and then did the scene. We could not really afford to do production design, redressing places. We could not build sets. And so literally we would put posters up in the elevators advertising, saying that we were looking for apartments that would fit some of our characters, so that we would pay people to allow us to use their apartments to shoot. But we had to find apartments that were already dressed more or less the way the characters would have them. And once we actually got some of the apartments that were going to star as the apartments in Starliner Towers, I ended up staying in one of those apartments. It turned out to be the special effects apartment, and so I would fall asleep with the parasites and skin grafts and stomach parts and things stuck on the walls, actually on the windows, where the effects guys were curing them and drying them. My shoes would be pulled off my feet by the blood that was sticking on the floor would stick and pull off my shoes. And of course I was inhaling God knows what. I mean, the uncured strange kinds of rubbers and latex that was everywhere. And the strange structures and bellows and tubing and everything. Suddenly I was shooting on Shivers a film where I was very far behind the camera. I had many people between me and the camera. I had assistant cameraman, I had cameraman, I had operator who was also the director of photography. I had focus pullers. Of course, I had no idea what a focus puller was at that point, although I had been doing it myself when I made my films, but not known the technical term for it. And I was having trouble getting through the machinery to the composition, to the framing that I wanted. Stereo and crimes are very, I think even now, they hold up rather well in a visual way, elegant in terms of the way they're composed and so on. First day's rushes, which in the States are called dailies, but we used the British terminology, which was rushes. It was a real shock to me. It was the first time it had occurred to me that I maybe couldn't do this. Maybe I really couldn't make films. Maybe I was not really a director. It was a horrible feeling because everything was wrong. The sizes of the heads in the frame didn't match. The height of the camera for the close-ups, even something as simple as a close-up, were all wrong, and the eye line towards the camera was all wrong, and the camera movement wasn't working. I mean, everything was wrong and awkward, and and even my dealing with the actors and the dialogue was getting lost in the technical overkill. Fortunately, we had about 3 days rushes to see at once because we weren't able to do them every day. And I could, going from absolute suicidal despair, I gradually started to brighten because the next day's rushes were actually getting a little better, and the next days were actually not bad at all. And I realized that what had happened was that I had to learn how to use the machinery of film, how to, in fact, abstract that rectangle of film from all the chaos, all the people, all the temperaments, all the egos, and just get back to only concerning myself with what was in the frame. Because when you see the film, that is the reality of the film, is only what's in the frame. And it took me only 3 days, I think, to really figure out how to do that. Unconsciously, I wasn't even aware of the process. But so in the space of maybe an hour of screening dailies, rushes, I went from despair to euphoria. And I felt, no, I can do this after all. In fact, I might be really good at this. And in fact, I remember when I took the film to the Hof Film Festival, which is a still ongoing a German film festival in the town of Hof. I showed Shivers many years later, and afterwards a man stood up, a German, who said, "How dare you show this film, having stolen everything from Aliens?" in it, from the film Alien. And I said, well, you have to realize that this film was done quite a few years before Alien, and the writer Dan O'Bannon had admitted to many people that he had knew the film Shivers. And then he said, well, then we know who the thief is, he said. And in fact, when you think of it, the film takes place in Starliner towers. A Starliner is a spaceship. It has parasites that live in bodies and burn their way through the bodies and jump onto people's faces and infect each other, going mouth to mouth when they're clamped on your face. There are more than a few similarities to what later became known as the alien effects. And of course, this was me sitting alone in my house in Toronto, coming up with these things.